is Susan Aikens. I am the sole resident and owner of Kavik River Camp. For the 9 months or more that I'm totally alone out here.
Sue Aikens dragged her shattered body across the frozen wilderness, alone, bleeding, and hunted by the same grizzly that tore her apart.
These are bear tracks, but this is a pretty big bear. He heard me. He didn't smell me, but he heard me. He probably saw the vehicle.
A dislocated hip, a crushed collarbone, and 500 miles of nothing but brutal Arctic cold between her and help. But this wasn't the first heartbreak Sue faced. Abandoned at 12, she learned to fight alone, surviving 10 days with injuries that should have killed her. What dark secrets and tragedies shaped the unstoppable spirit behind Life Below Zero? Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking tragedy of Sue Aikens on Life Below Zero. Abandoned in Alaska, Sue Aikens would never have expected her life to change when she was just 12 years old. Born in Mount Prospect, Chicago, she lived a normal childhood until her parents' marriage fell apart. When her mother decided to leave her father, she packed up Sue and moved them both to a remote village 80 kilometers north of Fairbanks, Alaska. The move was already tough enough for a young girl from Illinois. Alaska in the 1970s wasn't like the lower 48 states. There were no shopping malls, no familiar faces, and winter temperatures that could kill you if you weren't careful. But Sue thought she'd have her mother to help her adjust to this strange new world. She was wrong. Not long after they arrived in Alaska, Sue's mother abandoned her completely, without explanation. A goodbye, and no plan for what would happen next. A 12-year-old girl was suddenly alone in one of the harshest places on Earth. Most kids would have been sent to foster care or moved in with relatives. But Alaska in those days worked differently, especially in the remote areas. People looked out for each other, but they also expected everyone to pull their own weight. An old-timer who'd lived in Alaska for decades saw what happened to Sue. He walked up to her one day, handed her a rifle and some bullets, and said something that would stick with her forever. "You better learn how to hunt, girl, or you're going to die." That wasn't meant to scare her. It was just the truth. Sue somehow managed to finish high school before she turned 13. But her real education was just beginning. She had to learn things that most adults never master: how to track animals in snow, how to skin and preserve meat, how to stay warm when the temperature drops to 40 below zero, how to read weather patterns that could mean the difference between life and death. She got 32 giant Alaskan Malamute dogs and started running a 400-mile trap line to make money. This wasn't a hobby or a part-time job. It was survival. The trap line meant traveling across frozen wilderness for days at a time, checking traps, hunting for food, and sleeping outdoors in conditions that would kill most people. Sue learned to fix equipment with her bare hands in the freezing cold. She learned to make split-second decisions about weather, wildlife, and safety. Most importantly, she learned that in Alaska, you only have yourself to depend on. There's no calling for help when you're 200 miles from the nearest person. The skills she developed weren't just physical. Living alone in the wilderness as a teenager taught her to stay calm under pressure. She learned to think 3 steps ahead, always having backup plans for her backup plans. She developed an instinct for reading danger signs that most people would miss completely. Sue eventually stopped trapping because she decided foxes were friends, not fur coats. But by then, the damage was done. The harsh childhood that should have broken her had instead created something remarkable. She'd become someone who could survive anywhere, handle any crisis, and face down any threat. When viewers first met Sue Aikens on Life Below Zero, they saw a woman living alone at Kavik River Camp, 500 miles from the nearest city. What they were really seeing was the result of decades of survival training that started when she was just a kid with nowhere else to go. The abandoned 12-year-old had become an Arctic warrior. Years of surviving alone in Alaska had prepared Sue for almost anything. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened when she walked down to the Kavik River that winter morning. What she encountered there would push her closer to death than she'd ever been. But would she have the strength to survive 10 days that should have killed her? 10 days alone. With death, Sue needed water. It was a simple task she'd done hundreds of times before at Kavik River Camp. The river was starting to freeze, which meant she had to act fast before the ice got too thick to break through. She grabbed her usual gear and headed down to the water's edge, 500 miles from the nearest city and 80 miles from the closest road. She didn't see the grizzly bear until it was too late. The massive animal came out of nowhere. Adult male grizzlies can weigh over 800 pounds and run 30 miles per hour. When they attack, there's no time to think, no time to plan, no time to do anything except try to survive the next few seconds. The bear grabbed Sue with its jaws and started tossing her around like she weighed nothing. Grizzly bears have a bite force of over 1,200 pounds per square inch. Their teeth are designed to crush bones and tear flesh. Sue felt the animal's jaws sink into her skull while its massive paws ripped at her body. Her shoulder got torn apart. Her hip popped out of its socket. The bear shook her back and forth, and she could hear her own bones breaking. Most people would have died right there on the riverbank. But something made the bear stop. Maybe it got distracted. Maybe it decided she wasn't a threat anymore. Whatever the reason, the animal suddenly let go and walked away toward the water. Sue was alive, but barely. She couldn't move her arm properly. Her hip was completely out of place. Blood was running down her face from where the bear's teeth had punctured her skull. She was alone in sub-zero temperatures, with injuries that would have sent most people into shock. But Sue had been surviving in Alaska since she was 12 years old. She knew that lying there meant dying there. She started dragging herself back to camp. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she kept going. When she finally made it to her cabin, she called for help on her radio and started treating her own wounds the best she could. Then she did something that sounds impossible. Sue took a gun belt and used it to cinch her dislocated hip back together. She grabbed her rifle, walked back outside, and went hunting for the bear that had just tried to kill her. She found it near the riverbank and shot it dead. The walk back to camp finished what the bear had started. Her makeshift hip repair gave out completely, and she had to drag herself home again, this time leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Help was coming, but not anytime soon. In Alaska's remote areas, rescue operations take time to organize. Weather conditions have to be right. Pilots have to be available. Equipment has to be gathered. Sue waited 10 days. For 10 days, she lived alone with injuries that should have killed her, treating her own wounds, rationing her supplies, and fighting off infection in a place where the nearest hospital was 500 miles away. Every day that passed made survival less likely. When help finally arrived, the rescuers couldn't believe she was still alive. Surviving a grizzly attack was just the beginning of Sue's battle with the Arctic wilderness around Kavik River Camp. But how do you build a life in a place that seems designed to kill you? Building an empire in hell. Most people would have left Alaska after nearly dying from a bear attack. Sue Aikens did the opposite. She doubled down on her commitment to living in one of the most dangerous places on Earth and turned Kavik River Camp into something nobody thought was possible. When Sue first arrived at the camp, it was a disaster. The previous people who lived there had left garbage everywhere. In the Arctic, improper waste disposal isn't just messy, it's deadly. The smell of rotting food can travel for miles in the cold air, attracting every predator within a 15-mile radius. Bears had taken over the property. They were digging through trash piles, marking territory, and treating the camp like their personal feeding ground. Sue found herself surrounded by the same animals that had nearly killed her, but now there were dozens of them. She could have given up. She could have called the camp owner and said the place was too dangerous to fix. Instead, she grabbed a shovel and got to work. Sue spent months cleaning up the mess left behind. She burned all the garbage properly, following Arctic waste disposal rules that exist for good reason. In places like Kavik, you can't just bury trash or throw it away like you would in a city. Everything has to be burned to ash so the smell doesn't attract wildlife. She repaired buildings that had been damaged by weather and animals. She fixed broken equipment, replaced torn tarps, and rebuilt storage areas. The work was hard enough for a full construction crew, but Sue did it alone in temperatures that regularly dropped below zero. But cleaning up the camp was just the start. Sue had a bigger plan. She turned Kavik River Camp into what she called a twisted bed and breakfast. During the summer months from June to September, the camp would serve tourists, hunters, photographers, and scientists who needed a base of operations in the Arctic. The camp became a multi-purpose facility. It worked as a weather station, tracking storms and temperature changes that could affect air travel. It served as a refueling stop for small planes flying across northern Alaska. Most importantly, it became a search and rescue station for people who got into trouble in the surrounding wilderness. Sue built a small airstrip so planes could land directly at the camp. She installed fuel storage systems, generator facilities, and communication equipment. The camp had 3 rows of trailers for guests, multiple outhouses, and a big tent that served as a dining hall and meeting area. Running this operation meant Sue had to master skills most people never learn. She became a pilot coordinator, managing flight schedules and weather reports. She learned mechanical repair, fixing generators and fuel systems when they broke down. She handled business logistics, coordinating with clients who wanted to book stays at the camp. But the biggest challenge was security. Kavik River Camp sits in grizzly bear territory. Sue counted 83 bears living in the surrounding area. These weren't just any bears. They were massive Arctic grizzlies that can weigh over 1,000 pounds. Sue developed a system for dealing with the constant threat. She kept all her weapons loaded and within reach at all times. She tied ropes between buildings so she could navigate during storms when visibility dropped to 0. She regularly climbed onto trailer rooftops with binoculars to scan the horizon for approaching wildlife. When bears, wolves, or wolverines got too close to the camp, Sue would fire warning shots to scare them away. She only killed animals when absolutely necessary, but she was always ready to defend herself and her guests. The camp became Sue's fortress in the wilderness, a place where she could not just survive, but actually build a business in conditions that would defeat most people. Sue had spent years building Kavik River Camp into a successful Arctic operation, but fame was about to change everything forever. When television producers came calling, would this opportunity become her greatest triumph or her most devastating nightmare? The crash that nearly ended everything. BBC Studios found Sue Aikens living alone at Kavik River Camp and knew they had discovered something special. Her story was perfect for television. Here was a woman surviving completely alone in one of the harshest places on Earth, running a business, fighting off grizzly bears, and making it look routine. The show they created was called Life Below Zero. It followed Sue and other Alaskans as they lived through the extreme challenges of Arctic survival. The producers were respectful of Sue's lifestyle and didn't try to change who she was. They simply filmed her doing what she did every day. Sue earned between $2,000 and $4,500 per episode. For someone living 500 miles from the nearest city, that was good money. The show became hugely popular, and Sue became a fan favorite. Viewers loved watching her handle situations that would terrify most people. But on February 19, 2015, everything went wrong. Sue was filming a scene that involved riding her snowmobile across a frozen river at 60 miles per hour. This wasn't unusual for her. She had been riding snowmobiles in dangerous conditions for decades. She knew how to read ice conditions and handle her machine in situations that would challenge expert riders. But this time was different. The snowmobile hit what's called an ice heave. These are ridges of ice that form when moving water pushes up through cracks in the frozen surface. They can appear suddenly and are almost impossible to see when you're traveling at high speed. The impact launched Sue into the air. She flew off the snowmobile and tumbled through the air before crashing into the snow. The force of the impact was devastating. When the camera crew reached her, Sue was lying motionless on the frozen ground. The temperature was 15 degrees below zero. She was wearing minimal clothing for the ride, and now she was stuck on the open tundra while the crew tried to figure out how badly she was hurt. They had to cut away her outer clothing to see her injuries. Sue was lying on the ice in nothing but a sports bra and a winter hat while the Arctic wind cut through her body. The damage was catastrophic. Her collarbone had snapped in half with a jagged break that wouldn't heal properly. Her shoulder was destroyed. The impact had caused internal injuries that required immediate surgery. But the worst part was what the crash did to her future. Sue could no longer shoot a rifle from her right side. For someone who depended on hunting for food and protection from wildlife, this was potentially a death sentence. The rescue took 2 days. Getting medical help in remote Alaska requires perfect weather conditions and available aircraft. Sue had to wait in agony while arrangements were made to get her to a hospital in Fairbanks. When she finally reached medical care, doctors found damage that would require 14 screws, 2 titanium plates, and surgical wire to repair. The metal hardware would stay in her body permanently. The crash left Sue with permanent limitations. She couldn't lift more than 10 pounds. She couldn't handle activities that involved jarring motion for more than 10 minutes at a time. Most importantly, she had lost the ability to defend herself the way she always had. Sue later sued the production company, claiming she had been forced to perform the dangerous stunt despite objecting to it. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but the damage to her body was permanent. The crash should have ended Sue's story, but her greatest battles with heartbreak and isolation were still ahead. How does someone find love and meaning when living alone at the edge of the world? Love, loss, and legacy. Sue's injuries from the snowmobile crash changed everything about how she could survive at Kavik. She couldn't lift heavy equipment anymore. She couldn't shoot from her dominant side. The physical limitations meant she had to completely rethink how she ran her camp and protected herself from the 83 grizzly bears living nearby. But Sue had been dealing with loss and adaptation her whole life. She found new ways to handle the work that kept her alive. She modified her equipment and changed her routines. Most importantly, she refused to let the crash drive her away from the place she had built into her home. During this difficult time, Sue found something she hadn't expected in the Arctic wilderness. She found love. Years earlier, Sue had met a man named Michael Heinrich through the internet. He lived in New York, thousands of miles from Alaska. When they first met online, he was married, so they became friends. For 9 years, they maintained a long-distance friendship while living completely different lives. When Michael's marriage ended, their relationship changed. Sue was still committed to living at Kavik River Camp, and Michael had his own life in New York. Neither of them was ready to give up everything for the other person. So they created something that worked for both of them. They planned their vacations around each other. When Sue needed to leave the camp for supplies or medical care, she would coordinate her trips to spend time with Michael. Do you think Sue Aikens will ever leave Kavik River Camp? Or will she defend her Arctic empire until the end? What do you believe was the defining moment that made Sue Aikens truly unbreakable? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.